Join us on Patreon and become part of our journey to uncover history's untold stories. Your support helps us create in-depth content, bring hidden narratives to life, and keep history alive for everyone.
There is a certain image most people carry of King David, the shepherd boy who rose to slay Goliath, the harp-playing poet whose psalms still echo through synagogues, churches, and mosques, the mighty ruler whose bloodline would one day bring forth the Messiah. In countless paintings, stained glass windows, and children's Bible illustrations, David's face is framed by flowing auburn hair, his skin pale against the backdrop of the Judean hills. This image, repeated over centuries, became so ingrained in the Western imagination that to question it felt almost blasphemous. And yet, for anyone who dares to read the ancient texts with open eyes, to examine the archaeology, the anthropology, and the cultural realities of the ancient Near East, a far more startling picture emerges, one that has rattled the walls of the church for centuries. For there is strong historical and biblical evidence that David, Israel's most beloved king, was a man of dark skin. The shock of this claim is not merely in its challenge to artistic tradition, but in its theological weight. In the Christian West, where whiteness was long conflated with holiness and rulership, the idea that the central royal figure of the Hebrew Bible might have been black forces an uncomfortable confrontation with how history and race have been constructed. The question is not whether skin tone should matter spiritually. It shouldn't, but rather why it was changed, erased, or softened in the retelling of sacred history. The trail begins in the scriptures themselves. One of the earliest descriptions of David's appearance comes from 1 Samuel 16 verse 12, where he is described as ruddy in many English translations. For centuries, this was interpreted as implying a fair-skinned, red-cheeked youth, an image reinforced by European Renaissance art. But in the Hebrew, the word admoni does not automatically mean light-skinned with rosy cheeks. The root Adam means red or earth-colored, a descriptor also used for Esau, whose skin was likened to the reddish-brown earth of the land. In Semitic languages, this coloring was often associated with deep, dark, clay-rich tones, not pale pink. In the African and Arabian context, such a description could easily apply to someone with rich brown or copper-toned skin. David's own words in Psalm 119 and other writings reveal a deep connection to an environment of intense sunlight, shepherding in the wilderness, and working in the fields, all factors that shape the complexion of people in the Levant. But more telling still are the genealogical threads woven through his lineage. David descended from Boaz and Ruth was a Moabite, a people from the region east of the Dead Sea, known historically for their strong connections to the broader Afro-Asiatic world. Ancient Moabite art and surviving descriptions depict them with features and skin tones consistent with the darker range of Near Eastern and Northeast African peoples. Yet perhaps the most overlooked piece of this puzzle is Solomon, David's son. In the Song of Songs, a book attributed in Jewish tradition to Solomon, there is a striking line, "I am black, but comely, O daughters of Jerusalem." Song of Songs 1 verse 5 KJV. The Hebrew here is unambiguous. Shakora ani means I am black. This poetic voice is speaking in the royal court, in a context many scholars connect directly to the Davidic household. If Solomon, David's own flesh and blood, was described in this way, it casts the likelihood of David himself being of darker skin in a new and compelling light. The political and cultural geography of David's time further supports this conclusion. The Kingdom of Israel under David sat at the crossroads of Africa and Asia, with trade routes connecting it directly to Egypt, Kush, modern-day Sudan and Ethiopia, and the Arabian Peninsula. These were not isolated whitewashed enclaves. They were part of a thriving, mixed Afro-Asiatic world where dark skin was the norm. Ancient Egyptian reliefs show Canaanites and Israelites with brown to dark brown skin tones, often indistinguishable from their Nubian and Egyptian neighbors except by clothing style. The biblical record itself records interactions and even marriages with Cushites, as in the case of Moses, who married a Cushite woman, a union that sparked controversy in Numbers 12, controversy rooted in ethnic difference. The erasure of David's probable black heritage was not an innocent oversight of medieval artists. It was the product of centuries of European theological and political reimagining of the Bible. From the 4th century onward, As Christianity spread through the Roman Empire and became the official religion, biblical figures were gradually refashioned in the image of the ruling elite. In the Middle Ages, when European Christendom sought to legitimize kingship as divinely ordained, the visual portrayal of David as a European-looking monarch became a potent political tool. This not only elevated the European ideal as the standard of holiness, but also erased the reality of the ancient world's diversity. By the time of the Renaissance, artists like Michelangelo, Donatello, and others cemented the image of a pale-skinned David into Western consciousness. This was the David of marble statues and frescoes, his skin polished white, his face sculpted with Mediterranean European features. Few questioned the historical accuracy of these depictions because they aligned with a deeper, unspoken racial narrative that dominated European thought. The colonial era would then weaponize these images, presenting biblical history as the story of white rulers, white prophets, and a white Messiah, reinforcing systems of domination over darker-skinned peoples across the globe. The recovery of David's true image began in the 19th and 20th centuries, as archaeology and anthropology made significant advances. Excavations in the Levant revealed skeletal remains, pottery art, and inscriptions that challenged the sanitized European vision. Anthropological studies of ancient Semitic populations demonstrated that the Israelites, like their Canaanite and Moabite neighbors, bore features consistent with the indigenous peoples of Northeast Africa and Arabia. Scholars examining climate, diet, and migratory patterns concluded that the light-skinned Northern European depiction of David was historically improbable. African and African-descended theologians, particularly during the rise of the African American Church and the Rastafari movement, seized on these findings. For communities long told that they were alien to the biblical story, the realization that central figures like David may have shared their complexion was profoundly liberating. It was not about claiming exclusivity, but about reclaiming truth from centuries of distortion. This reframing did more than alter Sunday school illustrations. It challenged the theological frameworks that had been used to justify slavery, segregation, and colonialism. The pushback from established churches was fierce. To acknowledge a Black David would mean unraveling centuries of racialized iconography, confronting the ways in which whiteness had been woven into theology, and admitting that the historical record had been bent to fit European ideals. In some academic circles, the debate over David's complexion became a proxy for larger arguments about the politicization of Scripture and the need to decolonize biblical interpretation. Conservative scholars often argued that skin tone was irrelevant to the biblical message, true in principle, but telling in practice, since that same irrelevance had not prevented centuries of whitewashed imagery. Today, the question of David's true appearance remains controversial, not because the evidence is weak, but because the implications are so strong. To see David as a man of dark skin is to remember that the Bible is rooted in the history of peoples from Africa and the Middle East, not the palaces of medieval Europe. It is to recenter the story in its true geography and humanity, acknowledging the intertwined destinies of African and Semitic peoples. It is also to confront the fact that race, as we know it, was a construct imposed long after David's time, yet one that shaped how he was remembered. The image of David as a Black man does more than correct history. It restores dignity to communities whose heritage has been stripped from the biblical narrative. It reminds us that the faith traditions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam were born in lands of sun-baked earth, where kings could be shepherds, prophets could be poets, and the greatest rulers could come from a lineage tied to both Africa and Asia. The shepherd boy who became king may not have looked like the statues in Florence, but perhaps that is the point. Perhaps the real David, the one of the reddish-brown earth, the one whose lineage embraced Moabite and possibly Cushite blood, the one whose son declared himself Black, has been hidden in plain sight all along. And if that truth shakes the church, perhaps it is a shaking that was long overdue. For in rediscovering the David of history, we are not just restoring a face. We are restoring a story, one that belongs to all the peoples of the sun, unbroken and unashamed.